We're in a series we're calling Never Enough. We're exploring aspects of American culture that have a tendency to shape us in ways that are contrary to the way of Christ. And so the first one that we've named is progress, kind of our uncritical commitment to the aimless pursuit of more. More. Always having more stuff, right? And it leaves many of us feeling like we never have enough, we can never do enough, we never are enough. And hence the name of the series. And what we're trying to do is, as we name these things, we're then trying to explore practices that the Christian faith offers to people as a way to push back against some of these forces that aren't inherently bad by themselves, but have a tendency, when uncritically accepted, to shape us in ways that are contrary to Christ. And there are practices that we can engage in to sort of push back against that, to make sure that we're being shaped in the way of Jesus. So we looked at prayer last week. This morning, we're going to take a quick look at the practice of Sabbath. Our text comes from Luke chapter 12. Then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." Then he told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." Then he said, "I know. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and all my other goods, and I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?' Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." Sabbath is not going to church. Just to be clear, Sabbath does not mean going to church. Sabbath might include going to church. One might argue that Sabbath should include going to church. But Sabbath has nothing to do with going to church. Sabbath, put simply, is refraining from work, refraining from productivity. And in the Christian faith tradition, it's anchored in two primary convictions. The first is that there's an author to creation and an author to your life. That there's a God behind all of this, and that by creating, God builds into creation a rhythm that human beings are supposed to live in sync with. And it's a rhythm of work and rest. So if you open up to the book of Genesis and you read the creation story, what it looks like at first is that life is about filling space with stuff. First 3 days, God creates space, right? Day, night, water, land. The next 3 days, he creates stuff to fill the space. Right? Sun, moon, stars, birds, fish, animals, human, plants. So then he takes human beings and he tells them to be fruitful, to multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. Which makes sense, because up to this point, creation has been filling space with stuff. So it makes sense that human beings would fill space with stuff. We call that culture. It's making something of the world. And the way we do that is through what we call work. You apply your energy and your talents to make something of the world. And it's an indispensable part of being human. All human beings ought to have the opportunity to meaningfully make something of the world. Okay? But then on the seventh day, God does something different. Instead of creating more space and filling it with more stuff, it says that God does this thing called resting. I'm going to explain to you what that is, because some of you don't know. It means to cease. Cease. Stop. Cease and desist. Don't anymore. And here's what's really interesting about rest. Of all the space that God creates, and of all the stuff that God creates to fill the space, none of the space and none of the stuff gets defined as holy. The only thing that gets defined as holy is time. The seventh day. When God rests, God calls it holy. Here's the implication. Space and stuff are not holy in and of themselves. Time is. That life creation involves meaningfully making something of the world, working, but that's not the telos, the goal. There's a rhythm of work and rest. Life is not about filling space with stuff. It's about filling time with meaning. Life is not about filling space with stuff. It's about filling time with meaning. This is something that the guy in Jesus' story does not understand or has long forgotten. He quite literally thinks the meaning of life is filling space with stuff. And you know what this is like. When you think that the meaning of life is filling space with stuff, you never have enough stuff. And you never have enough stuff, you never have a big enough space to put your stuff in. Right? And how many of you have been in that place where you get more and more stuff, and you, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with all my stuff? You go, I know. I'll build a bigger space. You don't think to yourself, get rid of your crap. You think, I know, I'll build bigger space to store all my, and I do the same thing. More space, more stuff, bigger space. And you never have enough. And you can see how sort of depleting and dehumanizing this can be in people's lives. Life's not about filling space with stuff. It involves that, and that's an important part of life. But it's not the goal, it's not the telos. Celebration is. Actually receive it. You know, Jesus calls it what it is. Jesus calls it what it is. Thinking that all of life is filling space with stuff, he calls it what it is. He calls it greed. This is what it is. When we never have enough stuff, never have big enough space, more stuff, it's greed. That's what it is. And it's the opposite of the kind of thing that you engender when you rest, which is gratitude. You know, God, when he rests on the seventh day, it isn't like, you know, God's sitting around going, well, I hope this thing works without me, like, you know, actively doing stuff. God seems to be just fine creating and then resting while creation is active and doing its thing. When we work and we engage in meaningful making something of the world, that's good, it's important. But then we rest because that's the rhythm of creation. We engage in something holy. We have a chance to make something meaningful of the time. Give time meaning. It's an opportunity to think about your life, think about the world, think about what you're doing, where you're going, how you're doing it, to give it meaning, make it holy. So the first conviction is that God creates, and because God creates, Sabbath rest is a theological act. That when you engage in rest, you're making a theological statement. You're saying, no, God's in charge. God made this. There's a rhythm to it, and I'm supposed to live in sync with that rhythm. And everybody else might not do that, but I'm a follower of Christ, so that's what I'm going to do. Because as we were encouraged and reminded this morning, following Jesus ought to cost you something if you do it right. So there's a rhythm that we're supposed to live in sync. Second conviction is that because there's a rhythm that you're supposed to live in sync with, you cannot safely violate that rhythm for very long. And some of you know that. You cannot safely violate that rhythm for very long. And this is true corporately. When God gives human beings the command to keep the Sabbath in Exodus chapter 20, it isn't just directed at individuals. God doesn't say, and keep the Sabbath day holy. All right, go get them. He says, and that goes for your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and for all the foreigners living among you. Those are all demographics over whom you have some degree of power. Sabbath is a way of ordering human society so that all human beings have a chance to flourish. It's not just about you ceasing from work. It's also about you looking at all of the people over whom you have some degree of authority and power and saying, we're all going to cease from work so that we all have a chance to make something meaningful of the time. When you violate Sabbath, when you engage in work, that requires other people to engage in work. Maybe people who don't have as much financial or occupational flexibility as you do. So if you're not careful, you take this rhythm we're supposed to live in sync with and you violate it, you don't realize that you're participating in a way of organizing human society where there are lots and lots of people who don't have a chance to flourish the way that they're supposed to. This is our rhythm, and you can't violate that rhythm safely for very long and think that you're not going to create a culture that's depleting, that's dehumanizing. It's true corporately because it's true personally. You know, you can't violate this rhythm of work and rest personally for very long without it starting to have an impact on you. This is really interesting. In Exodus 20, God gives the command to keep the Sabbath. There's an echo of it in Exodus chapter 31. It says almost the exact same thing, right? God created in 7 days or 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. But in Exodus 31, it includes a little phrase, and God was refreshed. Now that word is almost always in the Hebrew Bible a noun. It's the noun nephash. It means soul or self. More, it means self primarily. Only 3 times in the Hebrew Bible does that word show up as a verb, and this is one of them. The literal translation here is that God created, and on the 7th day, God was re-selfed. God got God's self back. Now, that doesn't fit with systematic theology, but it does fit with if you open up the pages of the Bible. Because God's this very real, dynamic being. Here's the thing. You spend yourself in your work. You do, even meaningful work, like really good, meaningful work, you spend yourself. You have to trade your time, your talent, your energy in making something of the world. And it is by nature depleting. You need space to get yourself back. Because you can't spend yourself on and on and on and expect to have a self anymore. Not a self that you recognize, not a self that you understand, not a self that can be meaningfully given to another human being in love and understanding and grace and mercy. Come on, we all have that testimony of like, we've worked too hard, too many hours, we haven't taken time to re-self, we're depleted, we're constantly annoyed, frustrated, tired, which makes us annoying, frustrating, tiring, right? And life doesn't go well for you personally and for everybody around you. Here's the thing with work, though. We view it as a virtue. It's a virtue when we're busy, when we have a lot going on. It's like in our culture, we view that as something to be proud of. That is not something to be proud of. If you want very strong language for it, it's idolatry. It's not something that you should hang your hat on and be like, man, I'm really working hard. I'm killing it. I worked 100 hours this week. That should be a huge sign of a major problem. Spiritually, personally, corporately, we live in a culture that has no problem. Burning people 24 hours a day. That's why you get frustrated that you can't eat at Chick-fil-A on Sunday. Because it's weird. It's weird that a service-oriented business would intentionally take a day off. It makes us mad. Who do these people think they are? I want a delicious chicken sandwich today. But that means that people got to be there to work. The fact that they would have the gall to not work a day. It's like everything's supposed to be open all the time so we can get it whenever we want it. We don't even think twice about it. That's why when somebody does something like that, it's distinct. It's distinct. Listen to Tay's testimony. When was the last time you were in a room where someone said, okay, who in here is a Christian? And you had to go, shoot. And then suffer the ramifications. I don't have a clue what it's like to live in Laos. I would imagine Tay has an equal but opposite problem to us. She professes faith in Jesus where nobody does, and so everything she does is conspicuous, which makes it very, very difficult. Here, our problem is that everybody professes to be a Christian, and it doesn't mean anything anymore. It doesn't cost anybody anything to be a follower of Christ. There's no convictions that you actually have to live by. Sabbath is just whatever. It's Sabbath. Let's go play soccer. Let's go to the mall. Let's clean up the house. Let's build something. Sabbath is, it's one of those things that we just completely disregard as if we don't need it. Jesus said the same, but when this was like the primary point of contention for him. People were constantly coming to him and were bothered. But they were in an equal but opposite problem. They knew exactly how to keep the Sabbath. They just didn't know why they did it. We have no idea how to do it or don't value it at all. See, Jesus would say to them, guys, the Sabbath is a gift. You're not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is made for you. It's a gift. I wonder if in our culture, we need to go all the way back to Exodus 20 and 31, where God says, you're going to take a day off or you're going to die. Like we're at a place where I have to command you to do it because for some reason, we're like little kids that don't understand the value. We have to be told. There's a rhythm to creation of meaningful work and re-selfing. And if you don't take the time to re-self, then this cultural force of progress just keeps pulling on you and pulling on you and pulling. And you lose yourself. You lose yourself. And some of you have lost yourself. There have been seasons of my life where I've lost myself. God gives you a gift, and he's happy to command you to keep it if that's what it takes. But the reality is it's a gift to you so that you can get yourself back and you can be the kind of person that you're supposed to be as a follower of Christ. So my challenge, my encouragement to you this week, sit down, take time and figure out how you're going to take a 24-hour Sabbath rest. Do it. Figure it out. Stop saying to yourself, well, but Mike, I got this and I got... No, you don't. Figure it out. 24 hours where you're going to not be productive. You figure out how to put the rest of your work in 6 days. If God can do it, if God can command other people to do it, you can do it. Put it in 6 days and give yourself a 24-hour period to get yourself back. Re-self. Push back against this uncritical commitment to progress. Amen? Let's do that.